this is a session where we're going to share with you some of our thoughts and what we have done to get some feedback, because we really want this to be something, I want to say, almost as a tool, a practical tool that academics can have as part of their toolkit in terms of designing courses and thinking about the quality, especially in their courses. And yeah, so as we start, just those of you that are familiar with the waterfall, I'm just going to ask you one or two questions in, and then you can just type your response in the chat and just hold off. Don't post your answer until we give the go ahead, and then everybody can post all at once. And my question to you would be that why is quality, or let me say, why are you here today? Why is course quality important? Why should we have these conversations? Okay, if you're ready, you can post your answers in the chat. Yes. Okay, so improves the understanding of the content. Another answer, the quality of the course will keep the students engaged with the content. Sorry, I'm just reading out loud because the chats won't be in the recording. Too many times we lose them for lack of being attractive enough. Yes, okay, so keeping students engaged, inspires confidence in the content and course, and ultimately in the degree. Oh, good. So there's even a wider purpose that we are focusing on. I love that. Yes, so this is just some brief context as to why we are having this webinar today. And Lauren, we can move on to the next slide. So we have started with the development of the quality guidelines at SILT based on several things. So the transition to Brightspace comes at the time, especially when UCT is also moving into the blended context. We are moving out of PDL or emergency remote teaching, and we are now transitioning to blended learning, and we are thinking of ways of how do we support lecturers and how do we provide guidelines and put, I don't want to say systems, but what tools can we give to lecturers to help them you know, think about their courses. So previously there was, in October 2021, there was a process that kicked off called Rapid Refresh. Maybe some of you were part of it. If you don't and are not aware of Rapid Refresh, it was an attempt from SILT side to assist lecturers to enhance the teaching experience on their VULA sites. And there was an extensive checklist that was used. And many lecturers said that this checklist really helped them, and we can use this also. So we looked at this checklist, and we also looked at several other checklists. Most of you, if you're not, maybe are very familiar with the Quality Matters checklist that's out there. Many universities or higher education institutions use that checklist. So it could be either course development checklist, and we were thinking, but none of these really fit the UCT context. And so this is really a version that we want to make very context specific and as a tool to help academics. And it also serves several purposes. On the one hand, if you have the checklist as you start with your course, you can work towards some of these guidelines. So maybe you weren't necessarily planning on having these things, but now the checklist gives you an indication that this is an option that I can use. This is something that I can do. And I want to say that we actually want to use it as a pull technique to pull people into the realm of this is what I can do, this possibility in this context. And then later, the actual purpose of the checklist would literally be that as I go through my course at several places, but especially at the end, I can look back and then we can apply that reflective practice in terms of what has happened and what have I put in place in my course, so that I can review and reflect on this course, and then for the next iteration of my course, I can make it better in terms of the student experience. And then, so why do we have the guidelines? Many of the things that you have said initially on the next slide. So that would be to improve the student experience. That's very important for us. Something else, I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the Universal Design for Learning. If you are not, you can really just go and do a Google search. There's a whole framework on the Universal Design for Learning where we can create inclusive practices, and that's really something that we are striving at. There's a project currently running at UCT called the Redesigning Blended Courses, which is a very, very strong Universal Design for Learning focus. And then we also want to give staff the opportunity to reflect on their course development. And as I said previously, also just to share the latest ideas, practices, and templates. So what we are aiming to do is within this checklist also have links to other sources, so that if you stumble upon a specific item on the checklist or the guideline, that you can actually go and, oh, but this is how I can get more information, and these are some of the things that I can do. And also we explain why is it important. So just to mention also that we are not promoting this as some kind of a framework. It's not linked to any form of quality or formal accreditation. It's simply an attempt from our side to put a practical tool in place that lecturers can use. There are several dimensions of quality in this framework. What we have decided as a team at this stage is we don't want to have too many categories and split it on I want to say on a too granular level. So the 6 categories that we have identified, and we're quickly going to look at these today, is the orientation, student orientation, content and organization, accessibility, engagement and community, assessment and feedback, and lastly, evaluation. And we feel that these 6 things combined, that they really, if we look at these closely, that they can enhance the student experience that we create for the students. And then it's underpinned by basically 3, I want to say, other frameworks and other guidelines. As I said, the Universal Design for Learning, the CAST guidelines is available if you want to make a mental note or write it down somewhere. There are also several iterations of these checklists and item types, which is very interesting, as I want to say, as we understand more about what blended learning should look like, and what quality looks like, and as new tools and techniques evolve, then these frameworks also get updated. So that's the one. Then there's also our internal processes and frameworks that we look at. There's currently the draft assessment policy, which we directly work with on the section on assessment. And then also a constructive alignment, which most of you should be aware of, is that how do we create learning outcomes? We link our assessment to the learning outcomes, and all the activities in the course should be linked to all of these, and then just make sure that that constructive alignment is built in your course. And I want to say it creates a safe space for your students in terms of what it is that they need to learn, the content. I'm briefly going to talk us through the first section, which is orientation. And this section covers the essential information that courses need to cover before students get started with their learning. We have identified a few things, so there are a few questions, but sorry, Lauren, before we look at this, I just thought that how do we think about these questions? And for orientation, I don't know, maybe with COVID, this hasn't happened recently, or maybe not even before, but I'm sure most of us are familiar with Nando's in the South African context. And I like Nando's corporate identity and the way that they function. As I walk into a Nando's, I can tell that it is a Nando's simply by looking at the branding and the coloring, etc. But what's very good in terms of Nando's for me is that they use local artists, and each Nando, you can identified as a Nando shop, but it also looks slightly different. And there's some space for I want to say creativity and for artistic flair, and that's a very nice touch. And basically what this comes down to, the orientation for me, is what are the foundations that we lay to put the structures in place for safe learning and content that we can put in as part of the teaching experience. So the 6 questions that we look at that we want to share with you today. The first one, your course outline. Not does it exist, but it's a question of, is it readily available and is it downloadable in a dedicated place? So can my students, they know exactly where to find it? There's a dedicated space on the LMS and they can download it for offline use or for quick reference on their device, wherever they store it. Secondly, our institutional policies. There's a wide range of them, for example, plagiarism, harassment, copyright, etc., also readily available for students to access. Has the course team or convener introduced themselves? This, I want to say, most people would assume as a given in the face-to-face content, but we do need to think of how do we humanize our courses. Yes, most likely it's not going to be a fully online course, but in terms of the hybrid setup or the blended context, if your student missed the first class, how do you actually introduce yourself, not just by saying your name and your title to the students and telling them about the course, but how do we form human connections so that we can really enhance the student experience? How do we make sure that students can also form connections, not just with the content, but with each other, which speaks to the next point, are students asked to introduce themselves? But then also, you know, just in terms of me, and you don't have to share very openly, you know, and have your whole life, you know, laid bare there in front of the students. But what is it that really interests you in the content? Why is it that you love teaching the subject? So that they can also understand and see a different side of you. And I want to say, really be encouraged in the process. Videos, we really encourage the use of lecture introduction videos on the courses, even if you have a face-to-face course. It's very good, and it could be super short. I want to say almost the shorter the better, but you can think of creative ways of introducing yourself, maybe recording in your office or in your home office, where there are several other things that showcased in the background that also shows that you are a human being and have other interests outside of just your lecturing interests. Number 5 there is prerequisite knowledge clearly stated and considered. Very important upfront so that the students can tell whether they need additional support or not. And then lastly, our communication policies, like your office hours, your contact information, clearly outlined. And I want to say, this is from the orientation, but something to keep in the back of your mind also is just to make sure that you update it should anything change. So we have a Jamboard available, and we can share the link of the Jamboard in the chat with you. I think for the interest of time, we are going to continue to the next sections. If you have any feedback or any comments that you want to make, we have in the Jamboard, we have the various sections. I really want to invite you to go and click on the Jamboard and to make your comments there, and to make sure that you help us think of this. Is there anything that we are missing? So please help us look at, are there any gaps? Is there something maybe that we haven't thought of, or is there something really that you disagree with or that you feel is a red flag? Just label it for us clearly on the Jamboard, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. And then we can move. Oh, sorry, I just want to say, why is it important? The orientation, it just gives us a very high opportunity zone during the course orientation and week 1 to onboard students and to really make sure that they feel safe, they know where to address questions, and that they can continue with the rest of the course, I want to say, in an almost unhindered way. Just briefly mention that we have created a standardized course orientation template that will be available as soon as you get your Brightspace sites. If you have not received that already, that you can feel free to adapt, but we really encourage just to create a safe space for students in terms of the student experience across courses as well, and not just in your course. Okay, next up we have content and organization.
Hi everyone, hope you're well. Apologies for any background noise. I'll be covering the content and organization section. This section is about the content itself and how students access it and navigate it, and hopefully have a supported scaffolding and seamless learning experience. So this section obviously is quite a large one, but there are a few key questions that I've extracted that we can think about when we think about content and organization. Firstly, looking at how the course is actually structured. Particularly, we're interested in how it's presented on the online learning environment, but obviously we're also considering the contact or in-person space. But how course materials are organized, labeled, is it easy for students to follow the learning path in a consistent, logical manner? When it comes to the content itself, are there clear learning objectives? Oh, sorry. Can you not hear me properly? Okay, let me just go on for now and you can yeah, sorry about that. I don't know if maybe Tasneem.
Laura?
Yes.
Laura, it's a bit hard to hear you because of the background noise, I'm afraid. Who will jump in here? Was it Tasneem or Donna?
Yeah. Tasneem, I think.
Sure, I'll jump in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, Laura, there was a guy in the background that was super loud. So in terms of content organization, I'll just quickly go through some of the key questions. And if you do any of these in your course, you can just pop in the chat to to say how you've been doing it. So number one, have you chunked and organized and labeled your course in a logical and consistent manner? We often talk about learning pathways and patterns where students go through the course material, say, for example, on a week-by-week basis, and then they can expect the same experience throughout the course. Have you provided learning objectives throughout the course so students know what they're doing is linked to a greater objective? Have you provided instructional texts and also such things as learning time estimations? Some of these are sometimes more important if you have a online heavy course. If you do have a course that's largely face-to-face, sometimes a lot of that instructional text comes through there. Have you considered looking at the course content? Do you feel that it aligns to students' interests and needs, and does it reflect the diversity of the cultural and geographical contexts? So you could look at the readings that you're using in the course and the journals you're getting it from. How does that reflect diversity? If you are part of a major or bigger degree, have you considered, after students do your course and they're gone to the next course, have you considered how those two courses align? And then just in terms of materials, are they up to date and current as fast as possible? Next slide. And then why is this important? So it's important to structure your content in a way that it provides guidance to students throughout the course. The content is structured in a way that students will visit your course and they will know what to do based on how it's outlined. If it's done in this way, it will really encourage students to self-regulate, allowing them to sort of plan their time and work based on how the course is outlined. And then in terms of cognitive load, by structuring your course really well, it allows students to focus on, the content itself and the assignments itself, rather than, figuring out, where is this uploaded, or downloading something because it's not named correctly. It really helps with that aspect. And then it also allows some inclusivity and, student motivation to be fostered. Next slide. So these are just some examples of screenshots of some of Brightspace course. So on the left-hand screenshot, we can see that this is an outline of if you've seen Brightspace or if not seen Brightspace, this is how some of it looks. But you can see that we have a welcome module, then we have get started, and that falls into what Nadine spoke about in terms of setting up an orientation and grounding students in the course before they actually get started with the content. I think typically on Vula, course sites often open up the week before, and the course outline is shared, and it's just about expanding that. And then the modules are sequenced and named in a way that students can navigate through it fairly easily. The top image is more about showing you the instructional text. So if you have an activity, adding a time allocation so students don't overspend time. It is a very difficult thing to do, to estimate time, but it does allow you to gauge whether you are overloading students with time or expecting too much, and it helps them to manage how much time they should roughly spend on an activity or assignment. And that's just some instructional text. And then we also mentioned the fact that we want to, tell students what the learning objectives are. I see a question, are there a limit on the number of modules that can be shown at once? No, I mean, you can put as much up as you would like, and that makes sense for your course design. And there's obviously an ability to hide modules if you want to do a week by week release, or 2 weeks at a time or 3 weeks at a time. Yeah. Cool. I'll hand over to Lauren for accessibility.
Thanks, Taz. So
Lauren, I can't hear you.
no, it's fine. My headset disconnected for a second.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I'm going to go through the accessibility section, and then I would like to pause so that we can take a few minutes to just think about what we have covered so far and how applicable these questions are. We want to know whether you think these are things that you can ask yourself for your own course, or do we need to change it a bit, or something like that. So after the accessibility, we'll take a few minutes to go to the Jamboard and get some of your thoughts onto there. Okay, so accessibility is included here, and it has prompts to proactively identify and mediate barriers in the course content. And by following these suggestions in the section, you can create a more equitable learning experience for your students. And the questions in this section is it's technical, but once these things are applied, you open up the access to a lot more students on the course, regardless of their ability or disability or any sort of diversity that you might have in your classroom. So first of all, did you use the software or programs built in Accessibility Checker to review and repair any inaccessible items? And this is something that's available in Brightspace at the moment. There is an accessibility checker for the pages that you add that will check whether all of the heading styles are applied, for example, or list items are in the bulleted list, the color contrast is checked, and it also tells you how to repair those. And these type of accessibility checkers are available in other programs as well, such as Word or PowerPoint or Excel, the Microsoft Suite programs. You can run the accessibility checker and make sure that everything that's in your document will be accessible to screen readers, for example, for students with visual impairments. And then the next thing to check is the question is, can PDFs be searched, copied, and read by assistive technology? Sometimes scanned, or when the PDF is a scanned document, it might not be able to, the searches might not be picked up. It can't be copied if students need to keep certain pieces of information front and center, so that it's always a good idea to check the PDFs. And then lastly, do the videos and audio files have captions and transcripts. And this has become more and more important over the past few years as people use more videos. And we have found that students really appreciate that added access to videos and audio files. So why is this important? Accessibility is much more than providing resources in an accessible format. It's moving towards equality and inclusion. University work involves a lot of engagement with course materials, such as reading textbooks or articles, watching videos or doing research. And unfortunately, many of these resources available aren't always accessible for every student, which can cause extra stress and worry. And then also accessibility in the classroom enables students of all abilities, special needs and disabilities to have the same educational opportunities. Okay, so we have now covered accessibility, content and organization, as well as orientation. I'm going to bring up the Jamboard, just access it in the link, and then I think let's give a few minutes. If you could add in your thoughts on the questions that we have shared. So if you are able to have the Jamboard open as well, and then I can keep the questions available on the screen. So if we think about the orientation questions, the key questions for student orientation, would these things be possible for you to implement or check on your courses? And if not, what needs to change, or what would you rather want to be checked? Does everyone have access to the Jamboard? I don't see people on it.
Yes, everyone has access, but I think, you know, if you're unable to get to the Jamboard, you can also just maybe speak out loud, like, Gail, like, what have you done for orientation, or what do you think you want to do the next time you run a course? Sorry to pick on you.
I'm actually on the Jamboard. It's working well. I think I would agree with the person that said that adding a video on how to navigate the site is actually a nice way to introducing people to the platform that we're using and giving them a bit of orientation that is practical and hands-on.
Yeah, and you could come film it in our studios if you'd like.
Actually, the ones that are on YouTube, they are amazing. They're so professional. I have to say, it's great. I don't know how long the waiting list is for that, but it's looking amazing.
Thank you. I'm not sure there's a waiting list, but you can definitely try and contact the OBS people. Is there anyone who would like to maybe comment on accessibility or content? And then we can move along. Can I try picking on someone? Nicole, what do you think about some of the content or accessibility questions brought up? No worries.
Sorry, Nikki.
Lauren, should we move on to the next three sections?
Can I ask a question? Sorry,
yes.
Again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Take over, but in the accessibility section, people have contributed about the caption, and my specific contribution is the one around I think the captions are great to have, but some of them, in my case, for example, with the strong accents, they go a bit all over the place. So is there any facility for us to edit those captions so that we don't have to type them all over again for them to be usable?
That's a good point. I think there are some mechanisms for that on Vula and on Brightspace or alternatives. So I think in our future upcoming resources will definitely make recommendations on how to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Gail. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Then I'm going to move on to engagement. Okay. Okay. Why didn't it go to my entation? Engagement. Right. The next section we have in the guidelines is about engagement, and this
Sorry,
covers.
Lauren.
Yes.
We don't see your screen.
Oh gosh, that's weird. Thank you for that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Back.
Okay, thank you. So this covers building connections between students, humanizing the course, and encouraging participation in the course. And the 4 questions that we have related to this section is, are there a variety of opportunities for students to meaningfully interact with the teaching team? Are there tools and methods available for students to interact and collaborate with their classmates? Does the course include resources and activities intended to foster care and connection? And lastly, are student interactions designed and facilitated to be responsive to the variety of cultures and communication styles in the class? So these are quite deeper questions that you have to consider a bit more in terms of your course and how you can include these things, if not already. It's important for students to feel supported, to feel that they have access to you, access to each other, to interact and collaborate. And in terms of including resources and activities purposefully intended to foster care and connection, that might sometimes fall through the cracks when most things are about providing the content, the learning materials, and getting students to give them access to the materials they need. But they do also need to know that care and connection is important as well. And then interactions specifically designed and facilitated to be responsive to cultures and communication styles in the class. We know how diverse classes are, and that students come into classes from all backgrounds, all circumstances, contexts, and for them to know that they belong somewhere and that they are represented somewhere can make a big difference to their experience at university, in your course, in your class. If you have any feedback about these questions, please pop a sticky note onto the engagement slide in the Jamboard. I'm very curious to know whether these questions are applicable, or are they completely off the mark? Are they important to you, to your course, to your teaching team? And yeah, most of all, if anything doesn't make sense or you don't agree with it, also please tell us that so that we can know and adjust accordingly. Okay.
Can I ask a question, Lauren? Sorry, I'm disturbing you.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you give example of activities or resources that are fostering care and connection? Because while we do, like, let's say we try to promote discussion amongst the course participants, that concept of fostering care and connection can be quite different to. I was wondering if you had examples.
Absolutely, it can. I mean, it doesn't have to be different. It could be a story, a news story, or an article from Google or from a social media platform, for example, that is related to your content, and that also includes something about that subject being used and fed in a good way, or for good. I don't have a specific example right now, to be honest, Gail. If anyone else can think of something that could be used as an example.
Sorry, Lauren. I think I've attended a course recently where, as the participants, we had to introduce ourselves, and a Padlet was used, which I think was very good. And there are several other questions, and I mean, depends on the context of your course, the questions, but it was literally like your favorite this or what, and there were several options. We had the agency to choose between this, but then based on that, students could look at what do you have in common, and you have the agency to decide what you share as an individual. And then we could look at what do we have in common with at least one other classmate, and then direct it through the LMS, send them a message or an email. And then, and what I found is that when that message came in through my email, instead of just on the platform, it immediately became much more personal. So, I mean, I think it just needs to take some creativity on our behalf, and looking on the internet, there's a wealth of resources available. I don't know if that's maybe
that's a lovely, yeah, that's a lovely example. Thank you, Nadine.
Just Lauren, I added a link in the chat. It's called Equity Unbound, and if you go to that link and scroll down, there's a whole range of activities on, what you can do in terms of equity and care. And it comes through in different ways. I just want to add to what's been said. We later have a section on evaluation, which Donna will go through. And, say, for example, you have a really difficult section in your course, which students are known to fail for X, Y, and Z reasons. How can you attach things to that module that will help students through that? Maybe it's about getting feedback. Maybe it's an online session where they can, share their frustrations and about the section. So there's little ways around that you can also foster care and connection throughout the course. Yeah, continue, Lauren.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Taz. Lara also mentioned in the chat that Brightspace has a feature called Activity Feed, which simulates social media feeds where you can post articles, videos, and thoughts and comments. And this can also increase that sense of community and belonging in the course between students. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Right, so why is this important? Students are given the opportunity to form a community by building connections between the teaching team and their peers to create a supportive learning environment. When the teaching team engages students through meaningful active learning activities, the focus then shifts more to developing student skills than simply transmitting information. And then lastly, interactions and activities that include students' diverse identities, backgrounds, and cultures show that they are valued. Right. I am moving on to, these are examples. This is a quick example about a prompt for the class to introduce themselves and posting on a Padlet board, similar to Nadine's example. And then the bottom left is a little blurb about meeting the course team. And further down on this page, you can find pictures of the course team, their details, a little bit about them, and just for the class, just for the students to familiarize themselves with their teaching team. Okay, I'm moving on to assessment, and this is Donna coming up now.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to just, in terms of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on each question that follows. Obviously, and naturally, assessment would have a few more questions to look at, as it is something that's really important, and right down to the wording and the feedback, everything needs to be considered. If you can move to the next slide, please, Lauren. Thanks. So when we look at the designing assessments, the first thing we ask ourselves is, are the assessments aligned to the learning objectives or the learning outcomes as we speak of it? So is the student going to end up answering the questions to show that they meet the requirements or that they have understood what the outcome needs to be, so that I can send them on into the next year or into a workplace where they have actually met and ticked those boxes? And naturally, we look at, is it appropriate in terms of the level that it needs to be for the different stage that the student is in their course? Then, have you provided opportunities for collaboration in group work? And I know this is one that we struggle with, especially in the shift that we're in at the moment. But there's something about getting perspective and about having that interaction with your peers that help you to look at things differently. So where fitting, if the opportunity allows for it, can group work or peer assessment be brought in? Are there opportunities for continuous formative assessment? And with the continuous formative assessment, we need to make sure that there's variety. We all know that we learn in different ways, and perhaps doing a quiz is not the same as doing a practical example for a student that understands or learns differently. So they might be stronger in one type of assessment as opposed to another. And that is something to think about and make sure that we are offering them different ways in which to show their understanding. Do your assignments have real world examples? We speak about graduate attributes and making sure that students are prepared to go into the field that they are in. So we need to create real world examples, and especially given the time that we're in, are we looking at those examples in terms of a post-COVID world and what is happening and what is being experienced in the real world environment? Then have you or someone in your course completed the assessment and checked if it firstly can be completed in the given time frame, but also wording and layout? So there's a concept, a pedagogical concept called dog fooding, and it derives from IT perspective of using your own app. So how many of you have gone onto a website, clicked somewhere and be redirected or get frustrated with how things work? And it's the same thing with assessments. Have you done the assessment to check perhaps your wording is incorrect, and the answer therefore that students are giving is not actually the answer that you want them to give because of the way you're wording the question? So I know we are always pushed for time, especially in a teaching environment, but it's important to try and do that assessment yourself so that you eliminate a lot of potential errors and having to go back and redo things. Can you go to the next slide, please, Lauren? Thank you. So the last 3 questions to consider: have we provided clear guidance on the required layout? Sometimes we assume, or we say that I've told you in this lesson. Is it there for them to see that this is how to structure and lay out things, to eliminate the assumptions that students just know because they've been in class? The grading criteria and rubrics, it's important for students to be able to look at themselves and say, have I included A, B, and C? And obviously the level and strength of what they give is up to them, but they can at least check the points and make sure that they are covering as much as they possibly can or should in terms of the level that they're on. And then the toughest one to look at is the tiniest feedback. I know we all struggle in terms of marking, and that tends to be put aside, but the students are waiting and they're anxious and they want to be able to improve. And we speak about feedback in terms of constructive feedback and feed forward. Are you giving them the right examples to be able to push themselves forward to do better next time around? And that then leads into evaluation. If you can go to the next slide, please, Logan. To evaluate your course as in a course as a whole, or you as an individual being evaluated, but this creates an opportunity for continuous improvement. You can move to the next slide, please, Logan. So these are just 3 questions over here, and the questions include, do you have opportunities for early evaluation of your course? So for anonymous student feedback towards adapting your course. So Tasneem, when we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see has given us good examples of what micro evaluations can look like. And we speak about R&A, reflecting and adjusting. Are we making sure that what we are doing is fit for the students at the time and constantly reworking things so that they do work, not to only get to the end of it and figure out that certain aspects really haven't worked at all, and then we need to make a whole lot of change for the next cohort. So are you, as a team of whoever it is that you all lecture together, are there opportunities for you to meet and have that self-reflection? How is the course going? Are there adjustments that need to be made? And then finally, having the big course evaluation. And I know everyone's asking for course evaluation reports on Bula right now, but is it just another text box exercise, or are we actually taking that, reflecting on it, looking at it in ways to improve ourselves and our course moving forward to the next cohort or intake? If you can move to the next slide, please, Lauren. That's just examples, and great examples. Thank you, Tasneem, that she's given. If you can see on the left-hand side of your screen is an example of just a quick check-in to see how a week has gone or a module has gone for your participants or students, so that you can get engage sort of how has it been? Is there any extras that I need to do? Do I need to have another quick session just to make sure that I clear up certain things? Are my students on the same page as me? And then the other side of it is a great example of stop, start, and continue. So this is something that your students do or participants do for you. They give you something that you can start doing better and an example of how to do that. Then they, for example, you speak really fast and they can ask you to speak slower. Then something that you can stop doing. Perhaps you're having icebreakers at every session and they feel that that's eating into their time. So they can give you an example of something to stop and perhaps how it's affecting them. And then we all like positive feedback. So something you can continue doing. Perhaps you're giving them a motivational quote in the beginning of their class and they ask you to please do that because that's helping with things. Okay, I know I've got to run through things really quickly, but thank you so much for listening and engaging. Are there any questions? There is a little bit of time for us to have a discussion. So thank you so much.
I'm interested in hearing if anyone has actually done sort of ongoing evaluation during the course and how you've done that. Or if you now will do it, given what Donna's covered. Just pop in the chat or mic on. Otherwise, I'll hand over. Who's closing us off? Lauren?
I don't think anyone has posted in the chat. Okay, good idea about the macro evaluations. Okay, yeah, WordClap is a great tool to use for macro evaluations, for example. You can embed it onto the site, Villa or Brightspace, and students can do it right there. And then you can collate the responses, and you can download it as a PDF, for example. Is there anything that stood out, that jumped out for anyone, that they found, or that they think by checking up on this, I can really improve the student experience?
I think for me, again, speaking, surprisingly, it's the reminder that we need to be inclusive and remember that not all course participants have the same ability. And so I'd like to be made more aware of how I can prepare a course that really is accessible to all, because that's something I know I have a big oversight over.
Thank you, Gail. So our idea is to put all of these questions together in a 2-page document and offer it to lecturers to use for themselves or their own courses, to see where they might be missing things out, where they might be missing, where the course might miss things, or where they could improve something, and then perhaps get in touch with the learning designer to work with them on some things that they would like to add. And as Nadine said at the beginning, it's not this all at once. It can happen bit by bit, where you just add one little thing, and then keep going in that way, because it might feel
Lauren is just connecting again. You're back.
All of these questions altogether could feel overwhelming and just a lot more work, perhaps. So it could help to look at it bit by bit rather than trying to do all of it at once. Okay. Any other last comments or questions?
I just have like one question, myself. Does anyone feel that we missed anything, like a topic of some kind of mention of a course area? Yeah.
And Gail, just speaking to your comment about if we could offer tips, refer you to resources, that's the whole plan. So in each of these questions, we will have embedded links, that you can literally, if you say, oh, but I really want to focus on this one specifically, and that will take you to a resource. It might not be readily available, the whole thing at the start, as we are still in the process of drafting it, but that's definitely what we want to do. And we want this to become a tool for lectures, in your toolkit. If you're not sure, how can I improve my teaching? Take this out, look at the resources, they link, go through these questions. Definitely the plan.
Thanks, Nadine. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We appreciate all of your feedback and your insight, your thoughts. Ultimately, you are the people who we are trying to create something for that can be usable. And perhaps as we start sharing it more widely and people start using it, we'll get more feedback, and we'll go through iterations of improving these guidelines a bit more.